Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Code Remix Weekly. With me is your regular host, me, and unfortunately not Tim, who is out attending a conference today. Although I confess I can't remember exactly which one, as he's off to a new conference practically every other week. But I'm sure it's somewhere very fun and very European where Tim is hanging out. So since I don't have him to banter with, let's hop right into some announcements. And this week we have done a release of Open Rewrite 855.2 with a bunch of new JavaScript stuff. That work is still ongoing, but if you use JavaScript, you could already get in there and play with it a little bit. And that was a short follow-up to, I guess, a mere 5 days ago. We had a larger release of 8.55 with, man, just a whole bunch of stuff, mostly bug fixes. I don't think there's any major features in here. Although if you worked on a major feature in here and are offended that I said that, I'm sorry. But take a look at the release notes of that for yourself. And then we have a fun post from Jonathan talking about how he and I helped a prospective customer rapidly prototype a detection tool for their post-quantum cryptography initiative. Basically, this is a company that has a lot of encryption going on, and they are looking ahead to get ahead of the curve for quantum supercomputers cracking keys and want to take inventory of all of the TLS and SSL and just all of the encryption ciphers in use throughout a massive code base. And so Jonathan and I worked on a set of recipes to help them find all of those things in a sprawling code base. And Jonathan tells the story here in a brief and fun way on this LinkedIn post. So let me just paste that onto. Let me just paste that onto here. We have a LinkedIn user greeting us. I wonder if this is Tim. I can't see which LinkedIn user this is, but if it is Tim, hope you're having a great time there. If it's not Tim, I also hope you're having a great time there. Let's see. And we have this the latest edition of our Moderne monthly newsletter went live just 5 hours ago. You can easily go subscribe to this on LinkedIn. If you would like a digest of what what news there is with us at any given week. I'll paste a link to this one as well. And now this is an exciting one for anyone who is looking to get some live hands-on training with Open Rewrite, either at an introductory level or if you're a viewer of this this podcast, live stream, whatever it is, maybe you want the advanced level. There are now signups for free live training that will be conducted by Tim and myself, and probably Merlin as well. The first one's going to be done by Tim. So some very experienced teachers of Open Rewrite. So yeah, if you want to take your recipe authoring skills to the first level or to the next level, go ahead, sign up with one of those. The idea is that this is an instructor-led course where we'll be spending, it's not, the idea is for it not just to be like a webcast where we just talk at you for an hour, but interactive where you can ask questions, and the teacher will try to make sure that everyone is following along and has things working, maybe jumping out into breakout rooms and the like to try and make that happen. So yeah, look forward to that if that sounds appealing to you. And with all of those announcements out of the way, it's time for me to welcome this week's guest, which is Bryan Friedman. Bryan, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good, thanks. I'm
Yeah,
glad to be here.
I'm glad that you're glad to be here, and I'm also glad that you're here because otherwise I would have had to probably do a bunch of work to come up with something interesting to present, and instead I could talk to you. So you've already saved me a lot of trouble just by, already. So thank you for
I'm
that.
here for you. Yeah.
Wonderful. And I understand that what you're here to talk about is a conference you went to. So kind of like first question about that, who's this Gardner and why do all these business people care what a Gardner has to say about business intelligence?
Yeah, Gartner. So, Gartner, if you are in an enterprise, you may have heard of them or you've heard your boss talk about them, perhaps. So, Gartner is like a research analyst firm that advises, but like both learns from and talks to, vendors like Moderne and others, and then advises companies, enterprises on the trends in technology, what they should be looking out for, what they should use, those kinds of that kind of advice. And in a previous life, when I worked in an enterprise, it was the kind of thing where Gartner was gospel. Like what Gartner said went in, in a lot of large companies. That's sort of
Yeah.
particularly for leadership, that's sort of their eyes and ears
Totally.
to the
Yeah.
market.
When I was at Tableau Software during its growth phase, working on a bunch of business intelligence and data analytics tools, they the management there was incredibly pleased to be in the magic quadrant in the upper right
Yeah,
hand
right.
corner of the of the Gartner graph of it was like
Yep.
usefulness versus maturity or something like that was what was charted. So you wanted to be your product to be useful and mature, as in ready for enterprises to adopt. All right,
Yep.
so that's the Gartner we're talking about. Very good. And so this was the a summit of some kind. Tell me about this conference.
Yeah, so it's a mouthful. It's the Gartner Application Innovation and Business Solutions Summit. But
Oh,
on social media, you might have just seen it called Gartner Apps because that's a lot
mhm.
easier to
It's a
say and
lot
to
easier.
hashtag. Yeah. And so, it was a lot of application development leaders, enterprise architect leaders. And so it's really focused on enterprise applications, software engineering. You can connect with the Gartner analysts themselves. A lot of them give presentations. You can connect with other vendors. Moderne, we had a booth there. So
Mhm, mhm.
yeah,
What were some of the sessions that you attended that stood out to you?
yeah.
Even
So
just
I
one session.
sure. So I went to my priority. Like I was interested mostly in tech debt. There was a lot of
Hmm.
talk about tech debt, technical debt on the both on the expo floor, and there were 3 or 4 sessions on it. So I went to a few of those, and there were a lot of good information about how companies are facing like looking at a lot of tech debt, figuring out how to deal with a lot of tech debt. That's something I've been hearing about for a decade or more, but it seems
Totally.
it's still a problem, and it seems like a lot of leaders are finally starting to try to figure out like how do we actually take action and solve this problem.
Did you get a sense, and I kind of sometimes have this sense, but I don't necessarily have data to back it up. So I wonder if you've seen anything there to validate or invalidate this feeling or this hunch that I have that the pace of creation of tech debt is increasing, right? Like to the extent that tools like AI or LLMs or whatever help you to go faster. Every piece of code that you create and have to maintain and have checked in has some amount of cost and compilation time and test execution and cognitive load of someone having to understand it when they have to work on it. And as we have all these great tools to make more code faster, it feels like, well, with that's that's like having a turbo shovel that you can dig yourself into a deep
Yeah.
ditch with, and then be like, oh God, how do I dig myself out of this one? So I don't know. Was anyone putting up numbers to tech debt in a way that sounded plausible?
So yeah, and there was a lot of stats. Gartner loves to share stats. I don't think I saw anything specific about the like quantified impact of
Yeah.
AI code generation, but there was definitely talk about how AI is writing like I think there was some quote about from Google that there's more than a quarter of their new code is being written by AI. One of the I think another quote was around like 80 to 90% of code will be written by AI, before long. So
Uh-huh.
they did talk about that, and there was one session I know where they were talking about sort of mitigating security and compliance risks of AI generated code, and it talked about how sort of the pace of coding is like sort of like exponential graph, and the pace of security reviews is tapering off, and so it's
Constant.
just yeah, exactly, right. So it's just outpacing by there's I think the way they described it was sort of like a productivity and security mismatch. So there is definitely, it seems to be an impact. I find also Gartner can sometimes be a bit of a lagging indicator because they're also waiting
Sure.
to see feedback from enterprise companies, and this stuff is just kind of we're right in the thick of it. So I imagine
Totally.
we'll get some numbers before long, but they definitely talked about that impact for sure.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you're trying to, you need data to analyze, and you don't have data
Right.
when something is a new phenomenon. So, fair enough,
Yep.
fair enough. I'll look forward to what they come out with on that in the coming months and years. So, let's talk. What else did you kind of hear about tech debt in these sessions? Okay, you already kind of mentioned that AI is helping to increase the amount of code that gets brought into the world, and there's lots of discussions about tech debt there. How are people talking about tech debt and AI in the same context?
Yeah, right. So, well, first of all, excuse me. So I think, they gave some stats around tech debt, and I think one of them said something around 25% of time and budget in an engineering organization is going towards managing tech debt. So, and
Hmm.
I think it was like, fewer than half of the organizations are actually feel like they're doing it effectively. So they're all looking for solutions. So a lot of the sessions I went to talked about um, making tech debt more visible and measuring it and how to
Hmm.
prioritize it. Every Gartner toolkit, like you mentioned, the magic quadrant, everything's quadrants with
I mean,
Gartner. So they have
I'm an engineer. I love a good quadrant. So,
it's a good quadrant, right? So they have what they call the paid matrix. It's like
uh huh,
plan, address, ignore, delay. So it's
uh
basically
huh,
like you can assess your tech debt, and then the stuff that's in, again, the top right is the stuff you should address right away, and the stuff that's in the lower left maybe you don't even have to deal with at all. And right, so that's how they're sort of measuring it against risk, impact, cost, and prioritizing it. So they talked a lot about that, but and there was also
Did
sort of
anyone get
this, yeah,
specific about how to measure what is and isn't tech debt? I've always found software, as much as we call ourselves engineers, to often have a very artisanal sort of thing to it, where
yeah,
one man's clever solution is another man's awful tech debt that
right,
needs to be refactored. It's like we all agree that it exists and that there's a lot of it, but even as an experienced engineer, I don't just look at a code base and it jumps out at me necessarily. I mean, yeah, like some awful things can jump out at me of oh, you never should have done that. But there's a lot of things where it's well, that was reasonable at the time, has become unreasonable as circumstances have changed.
right.
How does tech debt get, how are they talking about identifying and measuring this so that you can even put it on, some kind of quadrant like this? Did anyone get into specifics on that? What the kind of methodologies are for identifying and categorizing and quadrantizing it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was a little talk about, so one of the sessions I went to talked about sort of the different types of hidden debt, of hidden tech debt, right? And
Ooh.
so they talked about knowledge debt, which is sort of
Mhm.
like, it it's maybe it was a great idea at the time, but the person who wrote it is not around anymore, and there's no
Totally.
documentation, and so no one knows how to use it.
Totally.
Then there's like architecture debt, which is more, I think, what we think of when we think of sort of decisions that we make that
Yeah.
seem right at the time that over time
Yeah.
don't scale or whatever else.
Mhm.
um, and then there was also, I think, what they called process debt, which is more around like, there's something broken in the process, like there's silos within the organization, or there was a workaround because you couldn't get approval, so you had to move quickly, that kind of stuff. So they sort
Yeah.
of talked about it in those different categories. But as far as prioritizing it, it was all sort of the same. It was like, what's the risk of this? What's the impact of this? What's the cost of this? And then sort of placing it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, so AI is the hot thing at the moment. Are people
Mhm.
discussing how AI comes into this? I remember what we had
Sure.
on the program and at Code Remix Summit, Vinkat, and a storied consultant and an excellent speaker and a great guest on the program, of course. And he made the point about one thing that he was using AI for really productively on a personal level, was for code reviewing his changes and even in code reviewing other things, not as the only code reviewer, but as hey Claude, what are the security implications to this? What are the flaws in this? What are the potential performance problems? And it
Yep.
spits out a list of things to consider. And so that's kind of one angle I see on this. Were there any other angles, or did you hear that same kind of sentiment expressed?
Yeah, I mean, AI was everywhere at the conference. Like almost every session had AI in the title. Every booth had AI on the sign, right? So everyone was
Hmm.
talking AI.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of the analysts were, in particular in the sessions, trying to sort of temper expectations and sort of set things
Yeah.
right. One of the other favorite Gartner tools that maybe you've heard of is the Gartner hype cycle, which is sort of
Hmm.
this like cycle of like tech gets really popular, gets really exciting, and then you sort of it hits this peak of inflated expectations and starts to fall and doesn't quite live up to it, and then it like sort of levels out. So most of the AI stuff is early in that hype cycle, so there's
For
a lot of
sure.
talk
For
about it.
sure.
And so there was a lot of sort of expectation setting, like AI can't just like bolt on AI and solve every single problem. But they did talk
Totally.
about like great use cases where AI can offer certain meaningful use cases. They talked about like documenting legacy systems, like just sort of point at the code and say, hey, can you document this? Extracting business rules maybe out of it at times, validating certain changes, just like you mentioned, like looking at that kind of stuff. But there was definitely the sentiment of like letting AI loose on your code to change the code is not a great idea. That was sort of like the universal thing. It was like humans must be in the loop, developers still need to be accountable. Probably one of the best sessions I thought was one of their analysts, Matt Brazier, who talks a lot about app modernization. And he talked about sort of it resonated, from an open rewrite perspective, because he talked about
Uh-huh.
like if you want to modify and modernize your code, your best bet's looking to like rule-based transformation. But if you want to, enhance that with AI, there's ways where the AI can help you identify the targets and like validate the rules, but not actually change the code. So that was sort
Yeah,
of the thinking there. But there was definitely a lot of like AI is good for a lot of things, but you just have to sort of temper expectations and know know where it's useful and where it can sort of cause you even more problems.
for sure, for sure. I definitely was finding it useful for personally recently, having been somewhat of a not like an enthusiastic early adopter or anything. Like a lot of what I do is fixing bugs, right? Like I just find myself personally as a
Yeah.
developer gravitating towards like investigating why something doesn't work and resolving problems more so than like creating a new feature out of
Yep.
out of whole cloth or what have you. And I have found it useful recently for generating test case or writing like bash scripts. Like I don't do a lot of bash scripting, so I don't remember the syntax very well, but I wanted to like customize something on my developer environment, and it was really good at spitting out a bash script to do a little thing I needed, or
Yep.
for doing like a task that I had done before, but not recently enough that it was front loaded in my mind in terms of like I was opening up a jar and doing things with input streams and output streams and all things I'd done 100 times, but 100 times spread over 15 years, which wasn't enough to
Right.
necessarily have it like front of mind. And it
Sure.
was very good at like I was using GitHub Copilot. It's in the chat mode. And it was very good at helping with those things, and very good at helping with like coming up with like open rewrite unit tests. Right, these can be very tedious to write because you have like several documents that you're changing in several ways, and yeah, it was helpful for all of those things. I haven't found it very useful for like debugging code yet because it doesn't have a rich mental model of
Right.
the entire project and like the implication of changing something over
Sure.
here that affects something way downstream. Um, so anyway, there wasn't really a question in that. I was just reflecting upon what
No,
you
it's
said
true. I
in
mean,
recent experience. Yeah.
that totally tracks with pretty much everything we heard, which is AI can help speed things up. But at the end of the day, there was a lot of talk about sort of like, is AI going to replace developers, right? Like,
Hmm.
and I think the general sentiment is it's definitely not going to.
Hmm.
But I think the quote was something like, AI, it won't replace developers, but developers who don't know how to work with AI, or developers who know how to work with AI will replace those who don't know how to work with AI, right? So it's like
Yeah,
it's a
it
tool
seems
that
like
everyone needs to be, well versed in.
yeah, yeah. I think you definitely see some the best developers using it to get better, and maybe not as strong developers using it as a crutch that they perhaps become dependent upon.
Yeah, that came up too. Actually, it was sort of talking about how yes, AI can help speed things along, but you don't. That doesn't mean like you just don't have to know the fundamentals or like
Yeah. It's even more
security
important
and
to know the
hardening.
fundamentals because
Yeah.
like it's a plausible it's like it's a plausibility calculator. It's like this token is likely to follow this other token. So just like in its nature, it produces not things that are right or wrong, but things that are statistically plausible. And so you need to be all the more rigorous about
Yep.
being able to falsify what it tells you, or 'cause
Right.
it's just like the perfect thing for fooling yourself. You know, it's the
Totally. Yeah.
you're always the easiest person for you to fool, and this is like a tool tailor made. Like you prompt it,
To
you
fool
get the
you.
response that looks
Yeah.
plausible from that. It's like it's tailor made for fooling yourself. So I wonder if
Sure.
anyone is talking about. I wonder if anyone, and maybe this isn't the conference for it, but if anyone is just talking about like practicing like the kind of mental discipline of like being rigorous about applying the scientific method in your own work. Well, you know, a good engineer should be doing that anyway to falsify your own
Sure.
assumptions. I've always found the most difficult things to debug are my own flawed assumptions about how the thing works that I didn't even necessarily know I was making.
Yeah. You don't see
Uh,
your own mistakes as easily, you know.
Yeah, excellent point from Ken here. It's very hard to verify AI output if you're asking a question you don't know the answer to. Yeah, I think
That's
it's
a
a
good
really
point.
interesting thought, Ken. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you have any other thoughts like that about, I think you're onto something with how to productively use AI and to use it not on maybe not on the edges of your knowledge or not exclusively on the edges of your knowledge. Like my example earlier with using it to do some bash shell scripting, it's like I don't know the syntax, or
Right.
I don't know a bash script in great detail, but I can look at it and be like, that's not doing anything like what I want, and it's easy to try and to test and to see if it
Yep.
has the appropriate result. Whereas if I was having it generate something that was going like deep into a complex system, that would have been hard to test and see if it worked right. Um, well, I could just be setting myself and others up for failure.
No, that's that absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So, what do we have any other talks of like practical use cases for this stuff? Anything that we haven't kind of mentioned in terms of debugging or code generation? Any other like practical uses for AI that I should be personally rushing to incorporate into my day to day? That's what this conversation is about. Me getting tips on my
Yeah,
on,
sure.
on my tasks.
Um, I mean, the only other one that I thought was a little bit interesting, although I didn't get as much information about it as I would have liked, is sort of using it for like to generate documentation. You know, I think
Mm,
I love documentation, but only when I'm consuming it, not when I'm writing it. So, you know,
for
I think
sure.
AI, there was definitely some a few vendors and some analysts talking about like, use AI to generate docs. But again, it's not like generate the doc and then put it out there. It's like, okay, you got to validate it and make sure it's just like
Got to
anything.
validate
But
it.
it did, it does help sort of with the tediousness of it, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. There's plenty of tediousness to it, and I think that like our documentation has not to toot our own horn, but has often been praised.
Yeah.
Uh, maybe it was just people having low expectations and finding that we've done more than the bare minimum. So I'm not saying that we're like the best in the world at this or anything, but we at Moderne have really benefited from early on hiring a technical writer, Mike Solomon, who has an
Yeah.
engineering background, which has just been really essential to success because this is very much a product like by software engineers for software engineers. So someone without that technical depth would just not understand anything about what any of the document, any of the things we need to document
Yeah.
are talking about, except at the very highest of levels. And so, thinking about how to use AI productively, you need to be able to like falsify what it's telling you. Like, I could see how this stuff could be useful for Mike because he has the skills and background knowledge to
Right.
falsify and be like realize when the tool is telling him something that isn't true, or at least realize when he needs to go like check with someone, like is this plausible? And so someone without that background, I kind of see this again to like the good get better. Like Mike could use AI
Right.
to help with documentation tasks, I think very productively. And someone without his engineering background who is trying to use it could just be digging themselves into a hole. And I
Right.
also kind of see how, like, if you were using AI to write comments in your code, that could be that could get you into a feedback loop because whenever you're going to be using AI to make suggestions on the code base, one thing that's going to go into that context window of that LLM are all the comments that are in there already. So if you were using an AI to write comments and it got some of them wrong, and then you were asking AI further questions to like write pieces of code or analyze pieces of code, it could be thrown off by the bad comments that you didn't falsify early on,
Right.
and its understanding of the code and the code it subsequently produced and the documents it subsequently write could be worse and worse, almost like the degradation of like analog media, over
Yeah.
time, just like
No,
filling up
I, I'm
with noise.
I'm hearing that's a thing too. Like just not even necessarily in the code, but just AI in general. Like it's already learned so much out there that it's now starting to consume information that it already spit out, and so it's like, yeah, it just degrades
Yeah.
um you know, the value of, I guess, of the knowledge that it's obtaining.
Right, right. Yeah, it's just like maybe a little bit like going into Photoshop on an image and like applying the same like sharpen filter like over and over
Right.
until the image just get like ridiculously exaggerated of those one little features. Yeah, it could take
Yeah,
something that was originally noise and blow it and like amplify it unintentionally over time, blow it up.
sure, exactly. Yeah,
Interesting.
something to be wary of.
Yeah. So, what we've talked a lot about AI. What about app modernization? This is a subject near and dear to our hearts. We're all talking about technical debt. We're talking about AI. How like what are we hearing in terms of like mistakes companies are making while attempting to modernize their applications and their code bases?
Yeah, well, so one of the keynotes they talked about sort of the two big mistakes. One, I can't believe is still happening, but it is, which is that lift and shift is still a thing. People think that cloud migration is modernization, and
Hmm.
that's not necessarily true. You're going to have to refactor, re-architect at some point. So I think the Gartner analyst quote was like, "That's not modernization, that's relocation." It's just like, yeah, that's true. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's one thing. And then I guess because of that, a lot of people are like, oh, well, then instead of just migrating, we'll just put AI on top of this and we'll have AI do it. Right. And AI can just re-architect. And it's like, no, that's not really going to work either. It doesn't mean like all of a sudden your application is, intelligent or ready for the future. So yeah, so I mean, it's I guess people looking for shortcuts, but at the end of the day, modernization is a tricky thing. We talked a lot about it with folks coming up to the booth to kind of like we had, you know, tech debt, reduced tech debt was on our booth sign, and people would just stop and be like, "Hey, I want to, I want to do that. How do you can you help me do that?" That was like really resonant with
Yeah.
people, um,
Yeah.
and so we would get to talking with them about sort of the challenges they're having with modernizing code, right? And some people had use cases that we were like, yeah, like we can absolutely help you with that. Like, hey, I've got 100 Java devs. I'm stuck on Java 7. We need to upgrade. You know, we have
Totally.
three and a half million lines of code, and we don't know how to upgrade from Spring. We're stuck on Spring Boot 2 or whatever. So we had a
Yeah.
lot of those kinds of cases, and then there were like fairly complicated cases that actually I'd love to hear your take on, like
Sure. Yeah. What do you got?
maybe
What
the
are the
best.
tough ones?
Yeah, so a lot of people wanted to do like straight up uh like language to language migrations. Like, hey, can we
Mm,
convert? I mean, the most common one, which is crazy, is COBOL. We heard people, like
yeah.
so many people talking about COBOL. And so typically we were trying to steer the conversation to like, hey, maybe we can help you analyze the code, understand pieces, parts of it better, but not like completely transform it. And there were a lot of people who needed that too, right? Like the
Yeah.
COBOL code is so old, they don't even know how to understand it. Um,
Absolutely.
but it wasn't just that. It was also like, hey, we want to change, from make this Java code from some older language, or go
Yeah.
from Java to .NET or .NET to Java
Sure.
because we want to standardize our code base or whatever it is.
Right.
And
Right.
so that's a challenge.
Yeah.
And similarly, like framework migrations, like, hey, we're on
Yep.
struts and we want to move to Spring, or like, and so these are like complicated scenarios.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're, I was inclined just to nod and agree and be like, yeah, that is hard. But
Yeah,
I remember
exactly.
you were looking for maybe a little bit more insight from me on that. And I would say some of those things they're all possible, and as much as you can, I think it really helps to like to have a person, ideally more than one person, who's an expert at both, right? If you have someone who's an expert at the COBOL and an expert at the Java that's going to supplant an expert
Right.
in .NET and an expert in Java, regardless of which way you're going, and who is ideally also a good project manager who you can kind of like put in charge of shepherding this thing, because one real challenge you have in these kinds of transformative migrations is you have a staff of people who are who know one and not the other
Not the other,
necessarily.
right?
And in order to do any kind of successful transition, you kind of need people who can straddle the line and work in both worlds. So some of my first thoughts aren't even like technical, but just like managerial of like
Sure.
set up like trainings and workshops to be sure that like everyone who's currently working on struts knows how to do spring or micronaut or whatever the successor to that is.
Yeah.
Because what engineers, like any population of people, like some people are engineers are very curious and will go out and learn the new thing, and you don't have to like
Yeah.
tell them to go learn. They'll just want to, and they'll go and learn the new thing and become experts in it. And other people are like, I got a job to do, I'm working on this thing, and won't go outside of that kind of comfort zone without being prompted to do so, without being provided resources and assistance to do so. So from kind of a managerial perspective, I'm like, you know, plan for like identify technical leaders who can be good project managers, like
Right.
set up classes, like help to teach the engineers what the new thing is, and about the old thing. Like if you have people if you have some vestiges of knowledge in the old thing, like
Mhm.
get whoever that is to teach some classes so that the people who end up doing some of the work of translating, whether that's automated or whether it's partially automated, fully automated, fully manual, are going to be able to understand what's going on and to deal with the consequences. Okay, and so that's kind of kind of like on a process level how I would approach something like that. From a technical level, where my mind goes to is of course kind of our LST kind of data format for representing code, which has some substantial commonalities to it between the different languages. And so we haven't really dug into this ourselves. We've been asked about it. Like the question of like, I want to do a language to language migration has come up
Yeah.
before, and you can use recipes to do that. It is possible. No one has really followed through on it because like to do it in general for like any software project, very, very difficult because
Right.
there's just an endless matrix of like what libraries,
Possibilities
language
for
features that,
use.
that are in
Yeah.
use. But for like a specific set of projects,
Right.
it could be possible. So like if someone really has this language to language challenge, I do think learning and open rewrite in some great level of detail, and maybe working with us in some capacity could
Right.
help with the language to language migration. You'd also kind of mentioned, like framework to framework migrations, which if you're not changing the language drastically, that's a lot easier in a place where it's like, hey, if there's not already recipes available to do it, like learn how to write a recipe. Like you can start making that change, particularly if it's a situation where there's kind of a one-to-one thing. You're moving from one piece
Right.
of web server backend software to another. Like they're necessarily going to provide similar kind of functionality. Yeah, that's just a fairly straightforward, a long might be a long
Yeah.
list of things to do, a long list of edge cases, but yeah.
Yeah, it makes
Yeah,
sense. So if it's like a limited or set, you know, universe instead of just like every Java library under the sun or something, then it's
right.
more attainable. That makes sense. I mean, the other one that seems maybe even harder to do in some respects is like, hey, we have a monolith and we want to break it down into microservices and re-architect it
That's
completely, and that's just you
that's
know
difficult for automation. That's difficult for AI.
totally
That's difficult for
for
skilled human
yeah,
engineers to
exactly,
do well. I mean, one of the
yeah,
first things that I asked someone who was suggesting something like that is why. Like, why are you doing that? For a
right.
while, you talked about
Right.
like the hype cycle of technologies, right? Earlier, like
Hmm.
microservices, there was definitely like a hype cycle about that, even though it's not so much technology, but as a design pattern where people were like, let's do it all in
Oh yeah.
microservices. And it's like there's just uh, a fundamental fact about network communication, about distributed systems, that communication isn't free. It has a cost. And the more
Yep.
little boxes you're putting on a chart that have to communicate with each other, those costs can scale, exponentially. So like you might want to be really careful about making the critical path of your application, a fleet of microservices, if it is something,
Right.
if they have to talk to each other, then you could lose whatever scalability you're trying to get out of a microservice architecture just in coordination costs between all of the little boxes having to message each other, and end up with a real mess. Whereas like some things, like just paying a lot of money for one really powerful computer to run this monolithic app,
Right.
might just be pound for
Fine.
pound more efficient.
Yeah.
So,
Time and a place for, each pattern. So
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Why did we start talking about microservices? I got into my rant on it, but
People want to automate the monolith to
oh yeah, people
microservice,
want to
which is
automate
like,
the lift and shift. That's
yeah.
that's a challenge. There's because you can't ask an AI to
Oh my
refactor your
gosh.
code base. One, wouldn't be a bad idea. Two, they just can't
Yeah.
do it. Like their
Yeah.
context windows are just not large enough to
Yeah. It doesn't
deal with the
understand it.
size of an entire of the big kind of monolith that you'd want them to. And even like with the rules based refactoring engine, I wouldn't necessarily say like write an open rewrite recipe for it either, because like what the appropriate organization of your software is so domain specific that like I can't just like write a enforce good architecture recipe that will go and make any given software
Yeah.
project well architected. Like what that means is very specific to your domain. Like a well architected insurance app isn't the same like as a well architected like veterinary care app,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They'll have well architected systems may have some attributes in common, but like what that looks like is probably very different. So where I would
Yep.
say that recipes and these kinds of technologies can have a lot of impact there is or on a transition like that, is helping you to just understand what the relationships in your code base actually are.
Right.
Like we
Yeah.
have a
Exactly.
recipe called find call graph, which will just give you a spreadsheet of every class, every method within that class, what methods from what other classes does it call. So you could say these software components call these software components, and they
Yeah.
call those ones, and you can start to create like a map of the code as it is, and have something concrete to discuss as you're talking about how you want to move things around, or reorient it. So using recipes or similar kind of tools uh, to to ask and answer questions of the code base is, I think, prerequisite to, and well, not only prerequisite, but part of the process in an ongoing way to successfully do a massive re-architecting of any given code base.
Yeah. No, for sure. And something like an LST that gives, you know, deeper insight into how the code works can help you do that, analysis probably better than just looking at the text of the code would, I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, totally. And that's what the data format that a recipe is going to go operate on. So if you're going to go do a source code search of like, here's a component we're considering changing something about,
Yeah.
re-architecting, moving out into a microservice, go find all the call sites to it before you attempt to do that. Like, actually
Yep.
understand what's likely to break, or what the costs are likely to be of undertaking that action. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, you were manning the Moderne booth while you were there. Have any interesting or unexpected conversations you mentioned some people coming up and being like, "We need help with our tech debt."
Yeah.
How'd that kind of go?
Yeah, I mean, again, it was sort of ran the gamut. It was just like anything that was like, oh yeah, let me just show you this demo, and they were like, that's exactly what I need, or like, oh, this doesn't break down monoliths, never mind, right? So it was just sort
Yeah,
of
yeah, totally.
across the. But actually, I think what was most interesting. I mean, so this is my fourth week at Moderne,
Yeah,
loving it,
yeah.
and so it was
Welcome.
great for me. Thank you. It's great for me to sort of get to watch, Jonathan and others kind of do the demo at the
Yeah,
booth. So I got sort of a good quick education there. And what was fun to see is, I think people sort of understood as we were explaining it, but then when you show it to them and they see sort of the diffs, and then particularly for some reason when they see that you can like issue mass pull requests or mass commits across like a light bulb goes on for them, like, oh, okay, I see how this works, at scale. So
yeah,
it was neat to see sort of people almost be a little skeptical at first and then sort of
for sure.
see that demo and like see the light, kind of like, oh, that, yeah, it makes sense. So it was fun
Yeah.
to watch that in real time.
Totally. Yeah, 5 years ago when we were just getting started with this, there was a lot more skepticism over like people wouldn't even like believe that it was like really possible to do
Right.
this, or would think that we were just like charlatans or something until we showed them this demo, and then they would start to believe it. We don't have that problem as much these days as refactoring technologies and AI coding assistants have just made machine transformation of code much more common, if not perhaps completely ubiquitous. But yeah, it is kind of often a light bulb moment. You know, it's just kind of going back to monolith versus like microservice type architectures for a second. One huge challenge if you have a bunch of microservices, or even if they're not, even if they're microservices, just a bunch of different code repositories, is propagating change between them becomes very laborious, right? When
Right.
I was at Tableau, we had a big monolith that everyone bitched and complained about for a variety of completely valid reasons that were quite painful. One was just like like the build got broken all the time, right? There were flaky tests, and bad stuff would get checked in, and that would disrupt everyone's day kind of instantly, right? So
Right.
people were like, well, if we did a more microservicey kind of architect, if we split this out into multiple repositories, if we got away from this monolith, this Yahoo over on that team I've never heard of and don't interact with can't ruin my day anymore. And it's like it gives you control over how change
Right.
propagates. But with control comes responsibility, comes labor being
Yeah,
involved
sure.
in propagating changes between those repositories. One big advantage of a monolith is when you change a piece of code, it, it like that change propagates everywhere immediately, or the build is broken, right? So it
Yeah, you know right
enforces a
away.
level of, yeah, it
Yeah.
enforces and makes immediate change propagation. But if you have a whole bunch of repositories, now if you change core lib and that core lib is used in 4,000 other repositories, you've got
True.
4,000 pull requests to go issue. Maybe not you personally, but your organization does,
Right.
and that is very costly without automation. So when
Yep.
you have a monolith, you have high consistency, very fast propagation of changes. When you have many repositories, you have low consistency and controlled propagation of changes. And you kind of want a situation where good change can propagate very quickly and easily, and bad changes can't propagate
Right.
at all. And so having some system kind of like Moderne, something that can issue pull requests, something that can take some of the labor out of just propagating a
Yeah.
change, can kind of bring to a microservice or a multi-repository environment some of the benefits of working in a more monolithy configuration.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, you're saying sort of in this age of AI and machine transformation that it's sort of more believable. I think that's true, but one thing to be careful of that I also saw people is like I think people assume AI is doing everything, right? And it's like,
Right.
okay, well,
It can
like
also cause
this is
skepticism
actually
because,
yeah, right. It's like, okay, this is actually a deterministic, rules-based
yeah,
approach.
yep,
There's some AI components to, around it, but like ultimately AI is not changing the code. And that was something that actually a lot of folks, um, you know, I think we're looking at a lot of other option, other software that sort of does the analysis, but doesn't change the code. And so they just assume like, oh, if it changes the code, it must be AI. It's like,
right.
not necessarily. So,
Not actually, yeah.
um,
Or if it even if it even if it changes the code and calls itself AI, it might just be calling the open
oh
rear
yeah.
recipe under the hood, as we've seen multiple times at
Yep.
this point. People are like,
Well,
"Wow,
and
AI
that,
can do so much. It's so good at Java migrations." Why is it good at Java migrations? Is it just calling the open rear migrate Java recipe? Oh, it is. Cool AI you got there, bro. Very nice.
yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, and actually, there was a Gartner analyst I think who uh, use the term AI agent washing. Like,
Hmm.
they're marketing AI, but
Uh-huh.
it's like not really AI, right? So like every
Yeah.
booth there said AI. So I can't
Yeah.
imagine they're all doing like deep AI on everything, right? So it's
Totally.
just, your mileage may vary, I guess, but be wary.
Yeah. Absolutely. Uh, I don't know. Do you have any other conversations that really stood out to you?
I think we covered most of it. I
Okay.
guess,
All right.
on the AI side, like people people thought the Madi demo was really cool, right?
Yeah.
Which it is.
Yeah, and for
So
anyone who
that,
might not have already seen it, Madi is kind of our
yeah,
AI assistant. Although it uses kind of whatever. It's like a bring your own model kind of thing. So if you like Claude or OpenAI or whatever, you plug in your API key for that, and it has an MCP server to run open rewrite recipes. So and is prompted in such a way that it is going to go look for recipes to answer the question you ask it, and then now you do have you get out of some of these limitations with small context windows and only seeing the text of the code or not understanding the types or these other things, and can kind of bring the power of recipes to bear easily without you having to personally go and memorize the now
right.
4,000 some recipes in the catalog.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
So I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that
continue with
was,
Madi.
yeah, no, that was something people liked was because, they're like, well, how do I know what recipe to use? Or, how can
Hmm.
AI help with this? Right. And that totally tracks with the session I mentioned earlier that Matt Brazier gave, which is like, hey, rules-based code transformation, but like AI enhanced by, identifying the targets, figuring out which recipes,
Hmm.
So, I think people really that resonated with folks too, because you show them the whole demo, you show them the recipe, and then sort of were like, and by the way, like if you don't want to know what which recipes you might want to use, and then sort of showing that natural language interface that went over
Yeah.
pretty well too.
Yeah, it's definitely handy because I don't keep track of the entire recipe catalog in my head,
Right.
and one nice thing about having your AI assistant call out to other deterministic tools is now what it does becomes so much more auditable, right? If you ask an LLM to do something and it comes back with an answer out of whole cloth, it's like, where is this coming from? It doesn't know. I mean, it doesn't know anything,
Right.
but even if it answered where it got its sources, it might be
Yeah,
wrong,
that's a good
right?
point.
Like it just come up with plausible things. But if you see that an AI was like, I ran these 6 steps, you could go and look at each of those steps independently of the LLM and be like,
Yeah.
these were the arguments this recipe was called with. This was the data table it produced. This was the SQL query it digested that data table with. So you can interrogate and falsify its answers all the more effectively when it shows its work, and it actually is it's real work. Not
Yeah. No, that's a
you
good
know.
point. I didn't think about that, but yeah, that makes total sense.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how was it being a face of Moderne and giving a demo only a month in? Did you do a good job? Did you embarrass
Uh,
us, Brian? Do I need to fire you? I
no,
can't
I
fire
think I
you.
did
It's fine.
okay. No, yeah, no, it was stressful. I watched sort of
Yeah.
the experts at work, and then if they were all busy, someone would come up, and it's like, all right, I guess it's my turn. But I like jumping in the deep end, so it was fun to kind of just to kind of give it a go. I
Yeah.
stumbled a little bit on the first
Yeah, that's
few,
fine.
admittedly, but I think it went pretty well, and like I said, people were uh, you know p- people were impressed with certain aspects, more than others. So I would just be like, all right, let's get to the mass PR part, let's get to the Modi part, right? And so
Yeah.
people got a good sense of it. But yeah, it was fun. I learned a ton, so I'm glad I was able to kind of be there and be part of the action.
Yeah, cool. Anything I missed? Any questions I should have asked you about this, or any anecdotes you wanted to share that we haven't gotten to otherwise?
Man, covered a lot actually.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much covers it. That's everything
All
I had.
right. All right. Well, I guess we'll more or less end it there then. Thanks for
Great.
thanks for coming on the program, Brian. It was a
Yeah, thanks
pleasure
for
to
having me
have
here.
you. And next week, Tim, I'm not sure if I will be here for next week since I'll be coming back from a trip to New York early Wednesday morning. So Tim may be flying solo. We'll see. Anyway,
That's only
thank
right.
you
He
ever.
left you solo this week, so
Yeah, fair's fair.
yeah,
Tim
right.
ditches me. I ditch Tim. It's just that sort of retribution and tit for tat that makes for a
Right.
really strong collaborative relationship. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, good stuff, Brian. Thanks for coming on. Thanks everyone for
Yeah.
watching. And Tim or I or both of us will see you again this time next week. Until then, bye bye.